What up, guys, and welcome back to Thomas Reacts here on the 360 Experience with myself, Thomas Maba. So today, guys, we are still talking about Zimbabwe, and we are still talking about the elections that took place in Zimbabwe, the unfair elections that took place in Zimbabwe. Guys, I'm not surprised that the ZANU-PF is leading. The preliminary results show that the ZANU-PF is leading, guys. I am not surprised by that. We know that these elections were unfair. We know that people were threatened to vote for ZANU-PF. We know that some polling stations didn't have ballot papers. We know that some polling stations closed early. A lot of nonsense happened in Zimbabwe. This is why I believe that nothing will ever change in Zimbabwe. As long as they still have Mnangagwa in office, as long as they still have ZANU-PF in office, nothing is going to change for Zimbabwe, guys.
So let's deal with the latest coming out of Zimbabwe, and that is that this election was extended by a day. Yes. This was not planned, but yes, we understand that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission saying that, well, owing to delays in delivering the material to the polling stations, therefore we must extend by a day, and therefore that was authorized by President Mnangagwa. Yes. And then there are arrests. Let's start with the disorganization that appears to have happened here. Yeah. How much time would you say the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has had to plan for this election?
It's really bizarre, because the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission knew 5 years ago that they would have to plan for an election that had a 12-hour window, yeah, and that there were going to be 12,374 polling stations across Zimbabwe. But still, on the day, they were just unable to pull it off. But it's not surprising, Kholi. The last time I spoke to you, I actually described it as orchestrated chaos.
Right.
And I was very deliberate in my description of this, because the way in which let's call it the restraints, the difficulties for the voters to cast their votes occurred in the urban areas seem to have been deliberately planned. Mm. And also in the rural areas, we saw something else playing out, which were aspects of intimidation on the day, because what basically happened is that we saw some ZANU-PF activists basically setting up what were described as exit polls, except that these exit polls weren't polling people as they left. They were taking IDs, names of people before they actually went to the polling station, really indicating to a lot of the people in the rural areas that were being watched.
And guys, just imagine how outraged you would be, like during the elections, and you find someone with an ANC table there telling you that you cannot go inside there to vote if you don't leave your names and your ID numbers here, so that we can track which party you voted for. It's outrageous, guys. It is outrageous. What happened in Zimbabwe, it is outrageous. And what's more frustrating is the fact that 5 years from now, ZANU-PF will still be in power. Like, guys, that is the most frustrating part about this whole thing. It is so frustrating. Like, they know that 5 years they're still gonna, like, guys, like they are still going to be in power. They're still going to be in power. And if you can look at the ZANU-PF, they don't care about some of these things. They don't care that the international community is watching. They don't care that even us in South Africa, we are talking about these things. They don't care. They don't care. As long as they manage to oppress those people, as long as they manage to convince those people to vote for ZANU-PF, or forcefully force these people to vote for ZANU-PF, they are good. They don't care about the fact that we are talking about these things. They don't care about the fact that as long as Zimbabwe is still a failed country, like a lot of countries surrounding Zimbabwe will have problems with Zimbabweans. They don't care about that. They don't care about the fact that millions of Zimbabweans are now living in South Africa, in Namibia, Lesotho, and other places. They don't care about that. They don't. This apartheid regime of ZANU-PF, like this ZANU-PF regime is an apartheid regime. This is an apartheid regime sponsored to you by ZANU-PF. No way different from your old oppressors. This is what's happening right now in Zimbabwe, guys. And it's so sad to know that as South Africans, this thing is happening right next door to us. It's happening next door to us. What it means that it can also happen to us. It's a huge possibility for this thing to happen to us. I don't think that South Africans are actually panicked enough to understand that what's happening in Zimbabwe can easily happen to us. Can easily happen to us. That's why you don't see the ANC members go out there and actually condemn these people for their barbaric acts. That's why you'll never see ANCs, like politicians, ministers, the executive. You will never hear them saying anything there, because they don't say anything. And it is dangerous for us here in South Africa if we have ANC at the helm not saying anything when this mess happens in Zimbabwe. I don't think South Africans understand the gravity of this situation, guys. I don't think we understand that the fact that we right now today in South Africa, South Africans have been complaining a lot about immigrants in South Africa. I don't believe that. I don't think we understand that this is part of the reason why South Africa has a lot of immigrants. I'm sorry. This is part of the reasons why South Africa has a lot of immigrants. And as South Africans, I'm going to say it again. You're going to have to accept it. As long as you don't want to accept that this is your war too. As long as you don't want to accept that as a South African, it is our job to make sure that our government actually condemns what's happening in Zimbabwe and not align themselves with Zimbabwe. We have to understand that this government right now that is in Zimbabwe, it's an illegitimate government. So the South African government has no business treating Mnangagwa like a legitimate government, like a legitimate president. Mnangagwa is not a legitimate president. Other African countries have no business treating Zimbabwe like a legitimate democracy. It is not a legitimate democracy. And guys, it is not Zimbabwe only. This is why these guys, it's so easy for them to roll out red carpets for each other, because they know that what's happening in Zimbabwe, maybe on the SADC, yeah. But the rest of Africa, this nonsense is happening. This nonsense that is happening right now in Zimbabwe, it's happening to a lot of African countries. We are in trouble, guys. We have to understand that we are in trouble.
Chris, how difficult can it be to plan for an election with just over 6 million people who are eligible to vote? And again, I don't know whether I'm obsessed with this figure of just over 6 million eligible voters in Zimbabwe, because I asked the question the last time. Where is the rest of Zimbabwe? And is there something to say around the 6 million eligible voters?
Yeah, there's a lot to say. Fully, an election is really a voter's roll. And the reason why you cite, the 6 million.
Only you want to know where the rest of Zimbabweans are. The rest of Zimbabweans are not allowed to vote. If only 6 million people are eligible to vote, it means that the rest of Zimbabweans are not allowed to vote, guys. Voter suppression, the rest of Zimbabweans are not allowed to vote, guys. If here in South Africa, we know that in Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF was threatening people, was taking people's ID numbers and names, if we know that they've closed some polling stations early, if we know that some polling stations didn't have ballot papers, all of these things, guys, what about the things that we don't know? What about the things that we don't know? How many of these things that happened in Zimbabwe and here in South Africa, we don't know about these things? What really happened there in Zimbabwe? We don't know some of these things. We only know a fraction of what happened in Zimbabwe. We are drawing conclusions from a fraction of the information that we got. We don't know the scale of this corruption that is taking place in Zimbabwe. We don't understand it. We don't know it. We don't know it. And bad enough, it's bad enough that right now Zimbabwe is even cutting people's voices, because I believe that this is the time where independent journalism was going to be in effect. Zimbabweans never needed independent journalists like now. This is the time that independent journalists were supposed to shine. But right before the elections, Mnangagwa said that you cannot say anything against the government. Guys, if you don't believe, just go to newsroom, man. Just go to YouTube and just go to newsroom and seek that interview of that minister from Zimbabwe, saying that people who say things maybe particularly against the government narrative are going to be thrown into jail. So they knew that right now we are in an era of technology, we are in an era of social media. They knew that people were going to be out there showing us what's really happening in Zimbabwe. And you know what? They said we cannot allow this thing to happen. So if these people are going to say we are doing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, we are going to throw them to jail. And it is law right now in Zimbabwe. That is why right now in Zimbabwe we don't get a lot of information about what's really been happening in Zimbabwe. It's because most of these independent journalists, they can't even do their job because they are tracked. You understand? They're gonna be thrown to jail, and these guys, they cannot risk their lives because like it is not guaranteed that you're gonna go to jail and you're gonna come back under Mnangagwa. I don't believe that if you go to Zimbabwe, if you go to jail, when you have said something about Mnangagwa, you're gonna come back. You're not gonna come back. You're not. So they knew that right now, this time, it's a social media era. They knew that they were going to be exposed of everything that they do. So they had to do something. They had to make sure that these people don't say anything. They had to make sure that if you say anything that is going to be against the government, you're going to go to jail. I don't believe that right now in Zimbabwe there are journalists who are interested in misinformation. Or like, what can you gain from misinformation? The only journalists that are interested in misinformation are these journalists who are pro ZANU-PF. Those are the only journalists who are interested in misinformation. But in general, I don't believe that the journalists in Zimbabwe are interested in misinformation because their countrymen, like their country, has been broken down. I don't believe that there's anything for them to gain for spreading misinformation. That's why you see a lot of these guys are now in South Africa. They are doing the rounds in South Africa. And these guys are fighting, guys. These guys are fighting for Zimbabwe. You have to understand that the job that we do right here, you can't do it so easily in Zimbabwe. These guys are fighting. As much as they live in South Africa, they are fighting for Zimbabwe. They are speaking for those people who cannot say anything about the government. They are speaking on behalf of those people. So we have to stop this nonsense of saying, nah, you hope well, you are living nicely in South Africa. Like, this guy is fighting for the Zimbabweans. Rotendo Matinyagare, we have to understand that Rotendo is fighting for the Zimbabweans. These guys are fighting for Zimbabweans. So this whole notion of trying to portray them as crazy and saying that these guys are living nice in South Africa, saying all of these things about ZANU-PF, why don't you go to Zimbabwe? Why don't you go to Zimbabwe, guys? If you want Zimbabweans to go home, then you yourself, you must go to Zimbabwe. Just go to Zimbabwe and live the life of average Zimbabweans. And you will see that a lot of South Africans are speaking from a position of privilege. They are speaking from a position of privilege and ignorance because they simply don't want to understand what's happening in Zimbabwe.
Eligible voters is because we assume that those are the people on the voters roll. However, as we sit here today, many opposition candidates will tell you that they haven't had sight of it. Indeed, many ZANU-PF candidates will tell you that they haven't had sight of the voters roll. When people were going to the polling stations, one of the difficulties in allowing people to vote is because they weren't present on the voters roll, which is basically a list of the people who are eligible. Now, if you fail to have a clean voters roll, it effectively challenges the overall credibility of an election. And that is why we would argue that the Z.E.C should have been obsessed with ensuring the credibility and the verifiability of this voters roll. However, that work wasn't done. And when you look at that number of 6 million, as you said.
And yesterday, guys, if you watched that video, if you watched that video that I did when I was reacting to what's been happening in Zimbabwe, the guy, he said that Mnangagwa, he got to power by military coup. That is the only language he understands. So this voting language, he does not understand. As long as Zimbabweans are still willing to vote, Nothing will happen in Zimbabwe because the ZANU-PF are going to rig the elections now and time and time and time and time and time again. That's what they're going to do. The people of Zimbabweans really have to stand up right now and fight fire with fire, man. This is time for fire with fire. All this democracy does not work. This Western democracy does not work for Africans, man. Look what's happening in Zimbabwe. The Western democracy does not work. They tell us to go and cast our votes. See what's happening in Zimbabwe. Did you see what happened with Nigeria? Man, the Nigerians were so mad when that idiot Tinubu became the president. The Nigerians were so mad. Even right now, they are contesting the guy's election. They are contesting his election because a lot of people are saying, this guy is not our president, man. He's not our president. And he wants Nigeria to invade Niger. So basically, this guy is saying that he wants Nigeria to invade Niger because they want to restore the democratically elected president in Niger. Despite the fact people saying in Niger saying that we don't want anything to do with this Western government, with this Western puppet. We don't want anything to do with Bazoum. Bazoum is a Western puppet. Bazoum has been in charge of Niger. What has Niger got to show for it? Niger produces a lot of uranium. Like, what do they have to show for it? It's crazy, guys. These guys are producing mineral resources only for them to go to France, for France to have electricity while the people in Niger don't have anything. So the president of Nigeria says he wants to invade Niger for democracy. So the president of Nigeria wants to impede on the freedom and democracy of people of Niger, so that the France can come and steal their mineral resources in peace. That's what he wants. That's what he wants. This is exactly why I say the African Union is so corrupt, guys. It is so corrupt. It is so corrupt. Dissolve the whole thing, man. Dissolve the whole thing. Dissolve SADC, man. Dissolve all of these organizations, man. Get rid of African Union. Get rid of SADC, man. Get rid of all of these organizations. Because these organizations are actually creating an environment where these people can actually agree with each other about the nonsense that they are doing. They agree with each other, man. South Africa really needs to get rid of all of these organizations. They are doing nothing for us. They are doing nothing for us. Right now, the people of Zimbabwe are living in an apartheid regime. Like what's happening in Zimbabwe, it's an apartheid regime. I dare anyone to come and tell me otherwise. What's happening in Zimbabwe, it's an apartheid regime. Sorry guys, I have flu. What's happening in Zimbabwe, it's an apartheid regime. I dare anyone to come and tell me otherwise. And all of these smart South Africans who always say all of these nasty things about Zimbabweans and foreigners as a whole. Guys, I would like you to go there and live there. I would like you to go there and live there.
It's quite surprising that such a few people are eligible in a country that has got a population of close to 20 million people. So it all seems rather contrived, rather strange. And the fact that so few people registered might also give you a sense of the fact that a lot of the people in Zimbabwe probably don't have trust in the system of elections anymore.
We're going to talk in a moment about why the arrests. Some 40 activists, we understand, are in police custody, and they may or may not have lawyers to represent them at this time. But before we get there, surely with so much controversy around the Z.E.C, who are the custodians of this election, who constitutes the Z.E.C? Is there something to be said about the individuals who are running this institution?
Well, when you look at the Z.E.C, one of the challenges about it is that a lot of the commissioners, a lot of the staff who are basically responsible for the management and execution of this election are not independent. And when we say independent, not independent from the governing party. Some of them are close relatives of senior officials in ZANU-PF. Some of them have actually worked directly in government and still have close affiliations with individuals in ZANU. So it really calls to question how we can believe anything that comes out from an institution that is so closely aligned and is demonstrated bias in favor of ZANU-PF. In essence, what we're saying, Goli, is that when you look at the technical aspects of the election, when you look at the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission itself, its composition, when you look at the prelude to this election, the context of what was happening, the use of violence, conditions that were not free or fair, we can basically begin to see a picture being constructed jointly by the Z.E.C, the ZANU-PF government, to make the political playing field for these elections uneven, and therefore calling to question, again, the legitimacy of this electoral outcome.
Well, that's the discussion then that we are now going to have, which is the credibility of this poll.
Yeah.
If activists are arrested,
Yeah.
and part of what we're told is the reason for their arrest is that they were conducting their own monitoring
Yeah.
of the election
Yeah.
results as they trickle in.
Yeah.
And apparently this is not allowed
Yeah.
in Zimbabwe. What does that say about the integrity of this poll? There are police officers, or
Yes.
should we say security agencies, who are saying,
Yeah.
do not declare this election.
Yes.
Otherwise you could...
The way the Z.E.C and ZANU-PF have conducted these elections, if there's one thing that we have to take from everything that took place in Zimbabwe, is the fact that ZANU-PF didn't want to have elections to start with. And like the gentleman saying right there, that these people, they have people there in the Z.E.C. Some of these people, they belong to ZANU-PF. So it was insane for people, for some reason, to believe that anything good can come out of this. Nothing good comes out of this. So I wonder, like, why don't Mnangagwa just suspend the elections and let the people know that, guys, from now on, you are not going to vote in Zimbabwe. As long as ZANU-PF is still in power, you are not going to vote. Because what he's doing right now, he's just wasting people's time. He's playing with people's emotions. People are really want change, babe. People want change. People don't want to leave Zimbabwe. I'm sure right now there are Zimbabweans who love Zimbabwe so much. They don't want to leave their place. But right now they are left with no choice. Just imagine another 5 years under the apartheid regime of ZANU-PF. No one would survive 5 years of this apartheid regime of ZANU-PF. No one. No one would survive it, guys. So why don't these guys just cancel elections at all and say that no one is allowed to come and there will never be elections in Zimbabwe? Why don't they just say that there will never be elections in Zimbabwe? And make it clear instead of playing with people's emotions. Because right now you say that you're going to allow people to vote for whoever they want in charge. But after all, you are pulling all of these tricks. You are closing polling stations early. You are threatening people to vote for Zimbabwe. You are taking people's IDs. You are doing all of these things. So that people, so that you make it hard for ordinary citizens of Zimbabwe to vote for whoever they want to vote for. Niggas, something needs to give, man. Something needs to give.
Going to be in trouble. I'm looking at tweets right now where a ZANU-PF presser yesterday gave a briefing and they apparently declared a victory. So why is it that the opposition must not be allowed to declare victory, and yet ZANU-PF, which is the governing party of the day, is allowed to do so?
Because they are dictators, man.
That's exactly the point. So these activists who were arrested are mainly from the Zimbabwe Electoral Support Network. They were engaged in a process known as PVT, which is parallel voter tabulation. This occurs everywhere in the world where opposition parties, civil society engage in tabulation of votes parallel to that of the Electoral Commission, wherever that might be. Now, the interesting thing about this, Toli, is that, yes, maybe opposition should not ideally announce the outcome of elections, but they are allowed. They are allowed to collate in a parallel voting tabulation. This is acceptable norms. But also when you look at this parallel voting tabulation, the challenge with it, I think, for the Zimbabwean authorities is that there's a form called a V11 form, which is placed outside of a polling station, all the polling stations, which basically gives you outcomes, the number of people who voted. This is freely available, and this is supposed to engender greater transparency and accountability. what these activists who were arrested were doing is that they were collecting all of these outcomes from V11s and simply creating a parallel tabulation so that they can verify what comes out from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission versus what they tabulated.
Let's wind it up. Sure, Chris Marilyn.
That is why they were arrested. That is the reason why they were arrested. Because they wanted to announce something that ZANU-PF Mnangagwa didn't want them to announce. That is why they were arrested. That could be the only reason, guys. That is the only reason, man. I don't want to give these guys a lot of credit, man. When it comes to ZANU-PF, man, I don't listen to anything. I don't listen to anything, man. These guys have... These guys have... They have destroyed Zimbabwe, guys. They have destroyed Zimbabwe. They've cost millions and millions of Zimbabwe to go and live outside their own country, guys. The situation in Zimbabwe is unbearable. There's no free speech. People cannot say whatever they want to say. Right now, like, even the elections are being stolen right in front of everyone's eyes. The apartheid regime of ZANU-PF is stealing the elections right in front of everyone's eyes. And no one can do a damn thing about it.
So, 2018, that's the year that President Mnangagwa assumed the authority, assumed the seat of power in Zimbabwe. That election was disputed, right? We are now in 2023. If there is another election dispute owing to these elections being called into question, what chance does Zimbabwe stand to rehabilitate its image in the eyes of investors who are saying, we stand ready to come and invest in your country, but if the democratic processes are going to be called into question, then maybe we may hold off. Zimbabwe get out of the
exactly. Like, these guys are literally stopping the average, like they are literally stopping the progression of the average Zimbabweans. Like the investors, they want to go into Zimbabwe, but they cannot under like ZANU-PF. They cannot.
Poverty that people are mired in right now.
You know, Polly, in 2017 in Zimbabwe there was a coup, which basically resulted in a strange situation when we look at the civil-military relations of Zimbabwe, but generally the politics of Zimbabwe. We saw a situation where, through a bloodless coup, the icon, President Robert Mugabe, was effectively kicked out of power and replaced by the military with a figurehead in the form of his lieutenant, Emerson Mnangagwa. Now, I'm raising this because of your question. How can we expect democratic outcomes from an undemocratic process which saw an unconstitutional change of power, seeing the military now dominating ZANU-PF? How can we expect that? The failure of the region to address this issue, this coup and that unconstitutional change of power, has resulted in the situation that we're in today. So what we're basically saying, Toli, is that reforms cannot occur, especially democratic reforms, cannot occur from undemocratic structures. The argument that I'm simply making here is that ZANU-PF will not reform itself out of power to create better socioeconomic conditions for the majority of Zimbabweans. What we've seen them really obsessed with is creating a situation where, in terms of who gets what, when and how, which is governance, ZANU-PF acts in very self-serving ways. They act to ensure that their personal wealth, that of their families, that of their close associates, is increased, not the people of Zimbabwe. So, directly answering your question, Polly, no, the economic situation will not improve. The investment conditions in Zimbabwe do not exist for secure investment, where investors have comfort that their investments are secured against the kind of abstract decisions that this government has a tendency to make.
I've got to ask the question, as I let you go, I've got to ask the question around the election observers. and we're talking the AU mission that is there. My understanding is that it is led by the former Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan. There should be SADC observers there as well, a mission. I'm raising these two bodies simply based on what someone said, and that is that at least half of the SADC problems, if Zimbabwe were to produce a legitimate election process, at least those problems may possibly be solved, because when there's a dispute in that country, we see a flurry of people leaving their homes. Zimbabweans who are in South Africa may not necessarily want to be here, but it's because of the conditions back home.
Yeah, they don't want to live in South Africa, man. I believe that Zimbabweans, they love their own country, man. They don't want to live in South Africa. This is why I get so frustrated whenever I see South Africans are taking immigrants in South Africa. This is why I get so frustrated. It's because these people, they don't want to live in South Africa. It's not like they want to live in South Africa. They don't want to live in South Africa, man. They want to live in their own homes. Zimbabweans want to live in Zimbabwe. They want to build their own country. They want to build their own country for their own families, for their own grandchildren. That's what they want. They don't want to live in South Africa, being treated as second-class citizens. They don't want that. They don't want that, man. So guys, I'm really going to urge South Africans to stop with this nonsense of our taking our brothers and our sisters. We really need to stop with this nonsense. We really have to take the power, or we really have to place our anger where it's supposed to go. We really have to be outraged at these governments. These governments are the ones who are making things unbearable for us. It is not the people of Zimbabwe. The people of Zimbabwe have done nothing for you, have done nothing to you. Zimbabweans have done nothing to you. The situation there in Zimbabwe, and the situation that can possibly be fixed by our own government, they are not doing anything. So you can't blame Zimbabweans for coming to South Africa, man. You cannot blame Zimbabweans for coming to South Africa. You can't. As someone who has, like, if you have a thinking head, you cannot. Everyone wants a better life, guys. Everyone wants a better life. We all want a better life. But we have to understand that we will never get to that better life until we hold some of these people accountable. That's why I said yesterday that if South Africans are not going to say anything about SADC, about President Ramaphosa, about ANC not doing anything about what's happening in Zimbabwe, we don't have a right to complain when we see an influx of immigrants into our country. We don't have a right. We don't have a right. SADC, that body is being led by South Africa, man. The president of South Africa is technically the president of SADC. So what is he saying? Nothing. Ramaphosa is just celebrating the fact that they just announced 6 new members in the BRICS bloc. He's happy about that. He's happy about the fact that the Chinese love him, the Russians love him. Even though the Americans hate him, he doesn't care. But he's happy that the Chinese love him, the Saudis love him. He doesn't care about what's happening right now in South Africa, man. So guys, I'm pledging with South Africans. Guys, please, let's be compassionate, guys. Let's have compassion. Let's at least try to understand where these people come from. Guys, let's try to understand where Zimbabweans come from. Let's try to understand the kind of situations they are living in. Let's do that. Let's do that. It's our place, guys. Let's do that. It cannot be that in one line we are talking about one Africa, but at the same time, when Zimbabweans are faced with problems in Zimbabwe and they come into South Africa, here we are complaining again. Guys, it cannot work like that. We cannot scream one Africa at the same time we say Zimbabweans must go home. We don't want anything to do with you. This is the time to show that the one Africa is possible. And because I'm speaking for immigrants and for foreigners in South Africa, I don't speak for immigrants and foreigners who are committing crime in South Africa. You have to get that and understand that and get that clear. I'm not speaking on behalf of people who are committing crime in South Africa. If you are committing crime in South Africa, you need to be arrested or you need to be sent back. I'm clear about that. If you are an immigrant in South Africa and you are committing crime, you need to be sent back or you need to be thrown to jail. I'm not going to mince my words with that. But when it comes to other people, we really need to have compassion and understanding where these people come from. We cannot hate each other like this. As Africans, we cannot hate each other like this. It cannot happen, guys. It cannot happen. I want Africa to be free, guys. I want Africa to be free to a point where a South African can go to Nigeria without the fear of being killed, because there's a narrative that South Africans are xenophobic. I want to live in a country or in a continent that understands that not all Nigerians are corrupt, not all Nigerians sell drugs. I want to live in a continent where we understand that we can live amongst each other and still be able to root out all these bad apples from us. These criminals, we need to root them out. But as Africans, we really need to be able to live with each other. I want to be able to go to Malawi. I want to be able to go to Nigeria. I want to be able to go to Egypt. I want to be able to go anywhere without the fear of being killed or being attacked, because there's a narrative out there that South Africans are xenophobic. So if you are watching this, you have to understand, majority of South Africans are not xenophobic. In South Africa, we are not xenophobic. That's why the structures like Operation Dudula are failing. It's because our people are not xenophobic. We grew up with people who come from other parts of the countries. Guys, I remember I grew up with my own grandmother, and my grandmother had 2 shacks behind her house, and those shacks, she would rent them out. And the majority of the time, those 2 shacks were rented by people who come from Lesotho, sometimes maybe Namibia, Malawi, maybe Zimbabwe. Like, guys, I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking about. I grew up living in the same yard with people who come from Malawi, people who come from Lesotho, people who come from Namibia. And those people were the most beautiful people that I've ever seen. I understand that. I understand. It's in South Africa, we are not a xenophobic country. Don't allow people like Operation Dudula to try to portray us as xenophobic. We are not xenophobic in South Africa. We are not. That's why, guys, I'm telling you about my backstory, guys. My grandmother had these 2 shacks. That's why that's why even right now, when I see Zimbabweans walking in the streets selling whatever they're trying to sell, trying to hustle for their own children, I understand where these people come from, because I grew up with these people. I grew up understanding that these people are not in South Africa because they want to be in South Africa. They are in South Africa because they are pushed by circumstances to be here in South Africa. So don't allow radical, stupid groups like Operation Dudula to make you think that South Africans are xenophobic. We are not xenophobic in South Africa. We are pretty understanding in South Africa. We do have people who are xenophobic in South Africa, who don't want to understand anything about immigration in South Africa. Because you know why, again, I hate this issue. Like, the reason why I hate Operation Dudula so much is because, you know, guys, when there's a protest and people are protesting against the foreigners in South Africa, when South Africans get to the shop, they don't ask whether someone is in the country legally or not. So even people who are in the country legally, they end up being on the firing line because they are being gaslit by people like Nhlanhla Lux and Operation Dudula. So even if you are in South Africa legally, even if you have your papers to be in South Africa, you might be attacked when people are protesting. And as South Africa, we cannot allow that. We cannot allow a situation where anyone who comes out of South Africa is attacked simply for coming out of South Africa. We cannot allow that. We cannot allow that, guys. People who are in the country legally, people who have papers to be in the country have been attacked in South Africa. A lot of people who are in South Africa legally have been attacked. You know why? Because when people are protesting, when emotions are all fired up And when stupid campaigns like Operation Dudula are leading this protest, they don't get to ask whether people are in the country legally or they cross the border illegally. They don't get to ask that. As long as you come from outside of South Africa, you get attacked. So these people basically, they hate South Africa. They hate Africans, man. They hate Africans. South Africans, we don't hate Africans. I love Africans. I love people from Zimbabwe. I love my brothers from Mozambique. I love my sisters from Malawi. I love all of you guys in Africa. I love Africans, man. I do not agree with these people who come to South Africa only for them to commit crime. I do not agree with that. But in general, I love African people, because African people are the most sweetest and are the most generous people right now. So we have to understand that the people who came to South Africa to seek for a better life, they didn't do that because it's fun to be in South Africa. They didn't do that because they just want to come to South Africa. They did that because of the circumstances. The circumstances have forced them to come to South Africa. If you don't want to accept that, then stay with your ignorance.
And so, what responsibility must these bodies, SADC and the AU, take if an election in Zimbabwe is declared, but we are told later on that it was not a credible election?
Yeah, in actual fact, if you look at SADC itself, there is a protocol governing the conduct of free and fair elections, which stipulates what conditions must be in place before an election, which stipulates the technical components that would determine a free and fair outcome. If only the Zimbabwean authorities, and I think the region itself, could hold Zimbabwe and the Z.E.C accountable for the implementation of this protocol, we wouldn't be having these problems. The African Union also has very definite and clearly stipulated principles that would determine a free and fair outcome. The problem is that they all pay lip service to these protocols, to these articles that determine democratic outcomes. So what we are saying, Tony, we are calling on our leaders in SADC to finally stand up and to say to the Zimbabwean authorities that this is not good enough. That when Zimbabwe is
this is bad, not good enough. Bad, man. Say bad.
Well, for example, I like to say when Zimbabwe sneezes, the whole region catches a cold. We all suffer from the problems that emanate from Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a critical component of the Southern African region. Before this current situation, Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket, not just of Southern Africa, but of Africa. Now we are in a situation where the people of Zimbabwe vote with their feet. They come to South Africa. They come to other parts of the region. We must call upon our leaders, even here in South Africa, for them to finally stand up against ZANU-PF and say, this is simply not good enough.
That's it, guys. He said a mouthful. That's it, guys. I know that things are going to be so hard, guys, for Zimbabweans. Things are going to be so hard. SADC doesn't want to do anything. African Union won't do anything because these guys are brothers. They treat each other like brothers and cousins and sparries, and there's no hope for Zimbabweans, guys. There's no hope, and I'm saying that with a bitter heart because I love Zimbabweans, man. I want Zimbabweans to succeed. I want the country to be better, man. Because if Zimbabwe is better, South Africa is better, man. If Zimbabwe is better, South Africa is better, man. So, guys, please tell me what you think on the comment section. Please leave that like button, and the most important part, guys, please subscribe. My name is Thomas Mabaso, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.